I think I should go now. It sounded quite good, didn't it? Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today. I think this is about my 9th trip to New Zealand, but it's 2 years since I've been here, so I'm beginning to get withdrawal symptoms. So despite calling Rotorua Stinkyville, you can tell that I really love New Zealand, and it's fantastic to be here with you. Excuse me, I bring you greetings from the Global Alliance. Prinz is a founder member of the Global Alliance, which is the association of public relations associations across the world, and has always been a fantastic contributor to the Global Alliance. Small, but incredibly forceful. And if I tell you that Cathy Arrow is the representative currently on the Global Alliance, you'll know why. So thank you so much, New Zealand, for your contribution. And I bring greetings as well from Australia. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing here. But over this last couple of years, particularly as it's been my privilege to be the chair of the Global Alliance, I've done a lot of thinking about the role of public relations practitioners and the way that it is beginning to change. And particularly the role of practitioners as leaders, not just as leaders within their organizations, but also as leaders of leaders and with leaders. And it seems to me that because the world now is very different from what it was a few years ago, the space for public relations leadership is getting bigger and bigger. And I just wish I was about 40 years younger, because I think the world is now for public relations, and I'm incredibly excited by the world that is opening up now for public relations. So, and what I've been asked to talk with you about today is you are what you communicate. And it seems to me that in the modern world, this is truer than it's ever been before, that everything that you do communicates, and notice I didn't say everything that you say, everything that the organisation does communicates. And I mean its buildings and its processes and the way that its structures operate, not only what its leaders do. And it's that really that I'd like to unpack with you today. So just like to go through with you one or two examples of everything that you say and do communicates. So here we are. Here's Lloyd Blanksfine, chairman of Goldman Sachs. And you see what he says just actually confirms the arrogance of bankers and confirms our disgust with them, really. And being a former worker in the financial services industry, I feel entitled to say that, you know, the great arrogance in the financial services sector. Who does this guy think he is? Not one of them has gone to prison. And I know people who have defaulted on their mortgage, who have lost their homes. I know people who have cheated on Social Security £50 and have gone to prison. And these guys have got away, literally, with killing people. People have committed suicide because of their actions. And so what he says here just actually really hits you full front and central about what we think of bankers. Okay, here's somebody else who communicates. You are what you communicate. As Lady Gaga, I think, par excellence, communicates through costume. She's made a career out of it. Here's something else that communicates. Okay, some people communicate through dance and ritual. Do these guys play rugby as well? Oh, they do, don't they? Yeah. They play quite good rugby as well. For the others, it's a logo. There are some symbolic logos there. And these logos are rigorously enforced by these organisations because these symbols absolutely encapsulate what they're all about. And I'll just give you a minute to think about what McDonald's conjures up in your mind, what Mercedes does, and the Red Cross and the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. They're really powerful evocative signs of what an organisation is trying to communicate. So whatever we do, whatever we say, does actually communicate. And in fact, communications, I would argue, is at the heart of everything. And as leaders, what we communicate is at the heart of everything. We manage people's expectations. We drive their fears. We create worlds that they want to be a part of. We create visions that they want to follow or that they want to reject. And so the power of communication, really, at the heart of everything that is done, is a force for good. And it can also, unfortunately, be a force for bad, as Karen has so eloquently expressed today. But the world outside our window has changed radically over the last few years. And certainly when I talk with leaders and CEOs, and particularly with government communicators, I do a lot of work in the government sphere as well, but very senior leaders on boards and senior communicators in government, actually I see the white of fear in their eyes from time to time. Because the world is getting madly complex and it's incredibly difficult to operate in a way that's meaningful for themselves, never mind for other people. So what can we as professional communicators bring to this space, this leadership space? I would say it's two things, and they reflect very closely actually what Karen has said. First of all, I think what we can bring is to help make sense of the outside. I call it contextual intelligence, which is about capitalizing on the connectedness that we have and the networks that we have and the relationship we're paid to build, and to bring that intelligence into our organizations and to help interpret what's going on out there. One of the problems with leaders is that they become isolated from the reality. And one of the problems of leaders is that they've got people inside the organization who isolate them from the reality. The people who are concerned to climb up the greasy pole, who will not tell them the truth. And therefore we need courage as public relations leaders to be able to understand what's going on, and that's a big enough challenge, because we're listening all the time, and interpret what's going on to our leaders with courage and with integrity. And that, I think, is a massive contribution that public relations can make, and it's a leadership contribution. Why? Because leaders need that in order to lead properly and with integrity. And the second thing I think that we bring is communicative intelligence to organisations. And by that I mean not only listening, and I'll come back to that later, but it's about understanding how our communications land. So poor old Lloyd didn't understand how his communication landed. Bankers do God's work. He had no idea what impact that would have and how it would be interpreted. And we have endless examples, from poor old Tony Hayward, who wanted his life back in the middle of BP, to politicians who just absolutely make a complete arse of it because they do not understand the power of words and the power of context. So I think this is a massive contribution that we can make to the leadership space. And why is this so important these days, and increasingly important? Well, I think that actually we're moving into a new world. We've enough of overt governance, which is compliance and regulations. In fact, we'll probably say we've far too much of this. And what this has done, actually, the world of compliance and regulation, is to take responsibility away from leaders. You just obey the rules, actually, and your compliance, and nobody can touch you. And that actually puts distance between leaders and people like us, ordinary people, but their own communities, because we know the world is about more than that. And actually this world of overt and covert accountability, rather, is incredibly powerful, because actually what really counts is ensuring that decision making across our organisations that we work for aligns with a set of values and tolerances which people outside there understand. They don't want regulation. They don't want compliance. They want something that connects. They want something that actually begins to meet their expectations. And you know what? They expect organisations to be part of their solutions to their problems, not a causer of them. And too often organisations cause problems in society and they're not part of the solution. So actually, by understanding what the reasonable expectations are on us as leaders and as organisations, and understanding what the covert agenda is, that's how organisations connect, that's how individuals connect. And the distance between what are the realistic expectations and how we behave is the legitimacy gap. And that's often the space that we have to fill. I call it putting lipstick on the pig. You know, so they make their decisions, they weigh out here, expectations there, and we have to go and put the lipstick on the pig to make the pill more palatable. So, what am I rattling on about here? Well, I'm an academic, so, you know, let's ground this in reality. Well, let's not for a second. Because what I think is that over the years, our discipline, which is the most amazing, fantastic profession, is all about being enabling organisations to impose themselves on the world. And that's why we're asked to be the post boy or post girl. We make the decision, you go off and make it so, Captain Spock. Okay? Enable us to do what we want to do. Whereas communication is much more than that. I think it's constitutive, and a lot of communication scholars talk about this. It's at the heart and soul of organisations and organising. If you think about it, there are very few things which are constitutive of organisations, and by that I mean, if you take them away, they don't exist. You can take buildings away. You can take money away. Okay? You can take leaders away, because you'll get communities that still come together. You cannot take communication away and an organisation exist or a community exist. And I think we need to harness the power of this. This is something that is absolutely inimical to, I won't say that again, inimical to organisations existing. And this is why communication, public relation is absolutely a leadership discipline. So what do we mean by we are what we communicate? Well, we are what other people say about us, and we are self-defining organisations. We define ourselves by what we say and what we do, and I don't mean narrative. I know that narrative is the big buzzword at the moment. Get the narrative right. Well, actually what you do and what others say about you is much more your narrative than you coming up with a story about yourself. So actually living the narrative is the thing that actually brings us to life as organisation and makes us, another word I hate, authentic. I'm going to use genuine. Okay? Make us genuine. Because again, authenticity has become a bit of a buzzword. So if this is the case, then what gives us a sense of direction? What acts really as a true north for us? What determines what sort of organisations we should be, given that we are constituted through communication? Well, in Melbourne, we did a lot of work on this as Global Alliance. We came up with a Melbourne mandate. And there's a picture of Simon Sinek, and he talks about purpose. We have to understand purpose. Purpose is why you do something. Values is how you do something. So that's the connection. So I'm going to give you a little challenge now. What's the purpose of public relations? Write it down. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to write down what the purpose of public relations are. Are we clear what the purpose of our profession is? in an elevator, we went to floor 5. So 2, 3, 4, 5. You've either just lost your job or you've just secured it. Okay. It's understanding the purpose of public relations that is really important. Now, your code of ethics, I looked it up, and certainly the Global Alliance Code of Ethics and the one in England says that our purpose is to serve society. But there's a problem. There's a big gap between knowing that and doing it. Okay? And the issue for us is, how do we serve society when we work for organisations who have certain expectations of us? Well, I would say that one of the reasons and one of the ways that we do that is to help our organisations become good organisations. By doing good, they will contribute to society de facto. And how do they become good? Well, they do that by making good decisions. Decisions where they've listened to the context, to people, and where they've internalised that, and where the bottom line becomes the benefit of society, not just money. And I'll give you a reason for that in a second. Okay, so understanding context, understanding communication, understanding values, and factoring those things into decisions will help an organisation become good. And just to quote Aristotle, which you all read every night before you go to bed, to practice, you will become virtuous if you practice the virtues. So you gain trust by being trustworthy. So organisations that practice the virtues become virtuous. But we do have a problem, because who's around the board table? You see, the stuff that we've just been talking about over these last couple of days is very rarely taught in business schools. So I accept total responsibility for the mess the world is in today as an academic, because in business schools we don't teach the stuff that I've just been talking about. We teach finance, we teach HR, we teach operations, we teach strategy. Do you know what? We don't teach that all these things are delivered through people and therefore by communication. We miss that connection. So we don't teach that communication is at the heart of all these things. And the trouble is, these guys who sit around the board table still dominate decision making, and they're on the old school. They don't understand that communication is constitutive. They've never learnt it. And therefore they behave in the old ways, which are all about bottom line thinking. And I see this because every now and then I'm invited into boardrooms, and I watch the behaviour and I see the decisions, and what they don't take into account is that the world has changed. And this is the reason why. Because in 1975, when organisations were valued, 81% of their value was in physical and financial assets. Now, the latest figures there are for 2009, and this is from the International Integrated Reporting Council. New way of corporate reporting came in last year, for those of you who are unaware. Integrated reporting, it's now a global standard, and now physical and financial assets are worth less than 20%. So what's the rest? What's the 80%? It's our territory. It's reputation. It's relationship. It's brand. It's communication, folks. And therefore, we need to be around that board table to ensure that the decisions that are being made add value to the organisation. And therefore, the challenge to us is, let's just examine ourselves as a profession. And that's exactly what we did last year. We actually sent around a questionnaire to all the associations in the Global Alliance, and we asked them what the aspirations of their profession was, and what the obsessions of their professions was, what the obsessions and aspirations, ambitions were. And we came up with some interesting results. The first result was around, yes, we do believe that our role is to serve society. But do you know what? There was a massive interpretation of what society was. There was no common view really about what our real purpose is as we serve society. Yesterday I was in Napier. What a fabulous place. Sorry about Stinky Bill, but I think that Napier is an absolutely beautiful town. And I went on a little tour with a tour guy I've got thousands of photos, who was just explaining how Napier, literally rose again after the earthquake. And she took us to one particular building and she said, "Do you notice the windows in this building are bronze? They're not steel." And the reason for that is that there is a window company in the UK called Crittall. It still exists. And they sent these windows over, specified as steel, to help the people of Napier in the rebuilding. And when the construction guys got this, they said, "But these are made in bronze. It cost a fortune. We can't afford to pay you. Please, can you tell us what the difference in cost is? And anyway, we can't pay you. Please send steel ones." And Crittall said, "This is our gift to you. We know you're by the sea. We know that steel windows will rot. So we're sending you bronze windows." I think today that would be called CSR. Yesterday, 50 years ago, they didn't even think about it. It was just a thing to do. I also heard the story of a guy who owned a shop down the road from another shop who decided to pay in advance to get his shop rebuilt because the person in the other shop couldn't afford to pay the builders. So he paid in advance so that his neighbour could have his shop rebuilt. It's really heartwarming stuff. And I think, well, this is what society is. Society is actually the people around you. This is about thinking of yourself, loving yourself as much as your neighbour, and society is actually building community. But actually, when you ask the profession, they're not quite sure what society is. The other thing that sort of struck us from this was that most public relations people say that our job is listening. Really listening to people out there. Do you know, there is no evidence at all that public relations people listen. Jim McNamara in Australia has just done a massive piece of research on listening. He wasn't able to identify a single instance of an organisation, private sector or public sector, where listening to people had changed things. Okay. So we don't listen, we're all about sending out messages. This is a big challenge for us. How are we working within our organisations to make them responsive and listen? Okay. So we say that ethics is the most important part of our work. But when you actually examine what we do, it's sending out stuff. Okay? It's process and the technical aspects of our work. That's our massive comfort blanket. And we run to it all the time. So, the ethics gets done in the process. Well, of course it does. But are we there as the true north of the organisation, saying this is the context in which we operate, this is the right things to do, let's give them bronze, even though they've asked for steel. Let's solve the problems and let's contribute rather than being a cause of problems. So we do have a problem in that we have ambitions to be one thing, but we act slightly differently. And you know what? We are what we communicate. And therefore, we wonder why we're labelled as tactical. It's because we're tactical. Okay. Now, our opportunities for strategic have to be opened up for us. I accept that. But are we talking the language of the 80%? Are we talking about adding value? Are we talking about a new bottom line that says the contribution of brand and relationships in reputation is worth 80%? That's a return on investment if you invest in public relations. Or are we talking some other language? Because that's the language that business leaders understand. Okay, so at every level then, this is a little model that I've devised with a colleague, we have to think about what's our contribution and whether or not we're talking the right language. So at the level of society, which is why our organisations exist, what our purpose is, And therefore, incidentally, I think that reputation, we can't manage reputations. Reputation is society's judgment on our performance. That's what it is. And if you've got a bad reputation, then you might be communicating badly, but actually you've earned that. So it's society's judgment on what we are. So society's why we do things, corporate decision making, and that board area is how we make decisions and whether or not somebody's caring for the 80%. Stakeholders and value chain is what we do all the time. That's where we operate. That's where value is created. And our functional role is what we do. And I would suggest that if we get the proportion of work right, i.e. a quarter on doing stuff, we might get some traction in our discussions. And how do we get that proportion down? Well, we stop doing this. We start enabling other people to do the tactical stuff. They've got every tool in the world to do it right there in their hand. Okay, so we've got to stop doing it, and we've got to empower others, and we've got to focus on those other areas. It's easy to do. Finance has done it. There used to be a time when I couldn't do my own budget. HR has done it. There used to be a time when I couldn't discipline staff. Now it's expected. Communication is constitutive. We have to give it away, and we have to focus on contextual and communicative intelligence and do that high level stuff. So then, marketing is always pinching our clothes, so I thought I'd pinch marketing clothes. Just to sort of encapsulate what I've been saying really, and to help us remind us of the sort of work and focus that we should maybe take on board. First of all then, I would say that the first P of communicative leadership is purpose. So, building societies that work is our purpose. Helping organisations make good decisions by listening, appreciating the context of people, because society is people, not things, and being part of the solution to people's problems. That's our purpose. Okay. Principles. These are the rules that govern our and leaders' behaviours. Values-based, delivered and lived day by day. So leaders not living values destroys trust and destroys organisations. I'd like to do a piece of work actually on CEOs who've lost their jobs in the last 2 years. I think I'd bet a large cappuccino that most of them lost their jobs because of the intangible stuff and not because of finance. Because they ruined the reputation of the company, normally through what they said or what they did. Very interesting piece of work. And then it's about people. So objectives are realised through people. So are the relationships that we build and the return on investment on people is 80%, as I said. And finally, process. So our ways of working, which have to be collaborative, they have to be cooperation, they have to be co-creation these days, constituting society in the way that we work. And processes, I've got a big nose, okay, so I think it's my business to be in every process in my organisation. As I said, structures, ways of working, that is our narrative. So there's a very famous business leader called A.J. Lafley. He actually retired from P&G in 2011 and he was re-engaged last year because P&G was not very successful without him. And he gave the 4 things that only CEOs can do. I think this is really interesting. Defining the meaningful outside, defining what business you're in, balancing present and future, shaping values and standards. I would, on that second one, I would substitute one word and then I'd say this is a perfect description of us. And instead of what, I would put how. Deciding how you do business, which is about values and about connection with people. And then I would say that that's our role. So, if we're about sorting out organisations from the inside, because the heart of organisation is where we actually begin to live the narrative, and we are about shaping the character of organisations in order for them to act properly. I think this is a beautiful quote from Lincoln. Character is like a tree, reputation its shadow. The shadow of what we think of it, the tree is the real thing. For too long, we've been hiding in the shadows. We need to start fixing trees. If we fix trees, we will have a position of leadership within our organisation. There needs to be a clear line of sight from purpose through to values, to principles, to people, and through then to processes. And for us, the evidence is that organisations are communication, and you are what you communicate. So my friends, I think we need to start obsessing about the 80%. We need to start obsessing about what our purpose is, and we want to be the grit in the oyster, challenging organisations from the inside. It was Einstein who said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that is counted counts. So I'll leave you with that thought, because it seems to me that actually we deal with what counts. It can be counted, but in tangible ways. So thank you very much indeed. So, questions, I think, or have I taken up all the time? Okay. Might ask Karen to come up and join me. Yeah.
Hi. I totally agree with all of those things that you've said, but I have been, well, feel like the Institute and practitioners have been hitting their head against a brick wall for a very long time, trying to get public relations at the top table.
Mm-hmm.
It is recognised by some chief executives as being extremely important, but it is often seen as the nice to have rather than the have to have. And my question to you is, how the hell do we make them see the benefit when we've been trying for years? It's not order management skill. And when we do have those conversations, you're actually seeing the squeaky wheels and it tries to shut up.
Yeah. Okay, I think there is hope, because I think CEOs are scared because the world has changed, and there are one or two organisations. I was with Unilever a few weeks ago, and they really have put sustainability and trying to do things differently right at the top of the agenda, and there are one or two other companies that are doing that, and they get it, and they will be the leading companies. So I think there's hope for us. Okay. But I think it's really interesting, and I don't want to be rude, but you said, how do we get them to understand us? I think the question's the other way around. How do we understand them, and how do we understand their world? And rather than asking them to attach to our agenda of communication, we ask ourselves questions like, what keeps them awake at night? What's the language they understand? And frame our contribution in the way that they understand, and that we solve their problems. And I'm sure that you're doing that. But I think this is really, really important. If they can see what the contribution is, that by doing the sorts of things that we've been talking about, we will increase the value of the organisation, because they're still driven by short term, and they're still driven by accountants and analysts who value the organisation. If we focus on growing that 80%, and we can demonstrate how we're doing that, and we can demonstrate how the organisation is able to do things because it's built the right relationships, or it gets an authoritative voice because it's got a particular reputation, then I think that maybe is the way to do it. So understanding what their agenda is, understanding what keeps them awake at night, attaching public relations to those things rather than saying, please understand us, might be a way to do it.
And that's great. work in an environment which is political as well as organisational,
Mhm.
and we have conflicting views on the two sides, and we are caught in the middle
Mhm.
of that. So we're constantly asking the questions, but we keep getting differing answers or conflicting answers from the two arms. And so it's actually